common. We all do this repeatedly. And we find it actually extremely easy to follow. And therefore I want to start with a simple example. And the goal in particular with this example is to demonstrate that it is easy and common for everybody to reject the hypothesis of God's existence. So let's take as example Poseidon, the god of the sea, the earthquakes, and the horses. Now our debate question instantiates to, does Poseidon exist? So I assume everybody here answers this question with no. Or are there any Poseidon believers here? There's one. Okay, so whenever I say Poseidon, think Thor or some other god you don't believe in. So there is some potential evidence for the existence of Poseidon. Okay? There are books. There's the Odyssey and the Iliad. He's mentioned there. And then there's observations, storms and earthquakes, which he was thought to have caused. And, well, probably with his trident. So why do so few people today believe in Poseidon? Well, let's probably say the books are not convincing evidence, and we have much better explanations for storms today. There's another complication with Poseidon, and that is he has a competitor, namely Neptune, who is the Roman god of the sea. So how can we decide which of the two is the true god of the sea? So the main point of this example is actually, when we're presented with a proposition, and when we judge it free of cultural forces, free from cultural forces, we will say there's no convincing evidence for that belief, and we consequently reject it. Now to get to the more general question, does God exist? We have to first define the terms. What do we mean by God, and what do we mean by existence? And, well, in the announcement it says personal God. So I thought Michael would be arguing for a particular version of the Christian God. He did not. But somehow we have to pick either a deistic notion of God, which I think he was arguing for. If we do that, the debate is almost over, because I have no problem when people say, oh, they believe in a deistic notion of God. But I think most people actually believe in a theistic notion of God, a God who interacts with this world, who has an interest of what we're doing. And so I'm, in the following, taking that view. And for concreteness, I think we can take the Christian version of the God, but the same arguments work with any other theistic notion of God. The second question is the nature of existence. So I will use two very simple criteria for the existence of something. First of all, it must be directly or indirectly observable. If we can't see it, if we can't observe it, how can we say that it exists? And second, that's very important, this observation must be shared, or it must be shareable. So if observations are only specific to an individual, then we cannot really discuss this, then the discussion is over. So from this definition we can obtain criteria for the existence of God. Either we can observe God directly, or we can point to objective observations that can be convincingly attributed to God. And the word convincingly is very important here. If you see outside of your house a wet driveway, well, it could be caused by rain, or somebody washed the car, or the sprinkler was running. So what is it? Well, it really depends. In the summer when it's dry, the sun is shining, and the sprinkler just finished, well, we would say, well, the sprinkler is probably the cause. In the winter when we just had a rain shower, pretty common here in Oregon, maybe rain is the reason. So, or in the case of Poseidon, storms and tsunamis could be caused by him, but we can also find meteorological and geological explanations. And again, what is the more convincing explanation here? Now, applying the criteria of existence to the Christian, or Islamic, or any other theistic God, well, first of all, we cannot observe him directly here and now. And then I submit there are no indirect observations that could not have been caused by natural means. So all we can really say is that God might exist. We could imagine a God that is compatible with our observations. But that is actually a very weak position. Storms and tsunamis are compatible with the existence of Poseidon, but they do not constitute convincing evidence. So can we therefore conclude with certainty that God does not exist? No, we cannot. It is theoretically possible that Poseidon or other gods exist. It is just very unlikely. And I'm coming back to the likelihood aspect later. So what does that mean now? Should we all be agnostics? Maybe I'm trying to weasel myself out of here with an agnostic free pass. I don't know. Don't feel that. In fact, I believe that agnosticism is not really a tenable position in practice. An agnostic believes that we either don't know or we cannot, in principle, know the existence of God. So, although this is appealing from a theoretical perspective, it is not, I think, a viable position in practice, at least not for the notion of a personal God who demands specific actions of us. So consider again ancient Greece and a sailor who had to go on a trip across the Mediterranean Sea. The common belief at that time was that sacrificing a bull or a horse would appease Poseidon, and not doing so would really make him mad and causing him to release his anger through sea storms. So now the sailor could be formally an agnostic with respect to the existence of Poseidon, but before his trip he had to make a very practical decision. Make a sacrifice to appease Poseidon or not? So even if he admits of not knowing the ultimate truth about Poseidon, he has to act in a way that is either in line with the belief that Poseidon exists or not. He cannot avoid the decision. And neither can we. We must decide, either act as if God exists and then follow his instructions, or if unconvinced of his existence, ignore religious doctrines. But we could also try to fake it and take Pascal's wager, but that is not actually an intellectually honest position. And moreover, it would not really work because God is omniscient, so better not try that. So, now if agnosticism is not an option, so what do we do now? We can neither prove the existence on the non-existence, so can we go either way? So this assumes somehow that the chances are 50-50, but that is not the case. God is actually a very complicated entity. So we're talking about the Christian God, or Allah, or some other theistic version of God. He can create universes. He can read billions of minds in parallel. He can perform miracles. He can even forgive sins. So, and then there are so many different possibilities for God. So the chances for one particular version, I mean, we have heard the chance argument, is practically close to zero. So the answer to the question, does God exist, should in my view be, we don't know for sure, but it is most likely the case that he does not exist. Now, many of you will follow my reasoning and accept it in the case of Poseidon, but reject it for the Christian God, or for a Muslim God. And there are only two ways in which you could do this. First, you could reject the need for evidence and claim an exception, and say, well, we're using faith as a reliable way of obtaining knowledge. Or you could say, well, there is actually convincing evidence for the existence of God. I will therefore have to address these two objections briefly. So, why is evidence so important? Well, because otherwise anything goes. We could not survive if we didn't filter assumptions based on their evidence. There simply exists too many false hypotheses. Acting on incorrect information in this world is very dangerous. This has been humorously captured by, I think you all know those famous last words. There are no crocodiles in this river, safe to swim. These fruits don't look poisonous at all to me. Or the bomb squad novels. I think it's always safe to cut the red wire. Or in my own area, we've tested it thoroughly, it's foolproof. But there are also very serious, tragic examples. Does anybody here remember Eva Worthington? Eva was a 15-month-old girl from Oregon City, and she died almost a year ago from pneumonia. When Eva got sick, her parents relied on prayer for her recovery, and they refused her medical treatment. Imagine little Eva, what she would do today had she been given the chance of medical treatment. She had to die because her parents were misguided in their belief without evidence. And I'm not even using this example to say how dangerous religious beliefs are. All I want to convey is the idea that believing something without good evidence, without convincing evidence, can have profound consequences and can be very dangerous to yourself and others. And usually we all rely on and demand good evidence to guide our actions. If you fly across the Atlantic, do you run off a cliff, jump on a rock and hope that it flies? No, you don't. You take an airplane. And why? Well, because you know, you have experience that it does the job, and you have no evidence that the rock would do. And if you are seriously ill, you usually consult a physician to get better, and not a magician. So, now even if we accept that good evidence is important, an important question remains, namely what evidence, or what makes evidence good evidence? And that is actually not difficult to see. The nature of good evidence is that it is convincing. And that means not only convincing to those who already hold the belief in question, but convincing to everybody else. All the people that at least are reasonable. So consider our judicial system. In order to convict somebody of a crime, the prosecution has to provide evidence that can show the guilt of the accused beyond any reasonable doubt. The evidence has to convince not the prosecution or their friends or the victims. No, it has to convince an independent jury. Now, how we answer the question of God's existence has so profound impacts on all our lives. Therefore, I ask you, in deciding the courses of our lives, should we accept any lesser standard of evidence? So the second objection is, there is convincing evidence for the existence of God. And these arguments can be grouped into three kinds. There are so-called proofs, and I think Michael mentioned this. There's general agreement that there's no conclusive proof for the existence, for or against the existence of God. And so I won't address this, although Michael tried to do the argument by causation, so I'll have to address this in the questioning phase. The second group of arguments are non-arguments, actually. For example, religion is useful, or shifting the burden of proof, and so I will not address them here either.